Female masturbation, like female sexuality, has been shrouded in mystery over the centuries, even suppressed. So why is it that we're so afraid women might discover their sexuality? In today's podcast, we're going to talk about how female masturbation might be a window into understanding female sexuality and building women's vitality and energy. Hi, I'm Dr. Neelima Deshpande. I'm a gynecologist with 3 decades of international experience in women's healthcare. I have expertise in menopause and sexual health. And you're listening to V for Vagina, the podcast that dispels myths and misunderstandings about the vagina and empowers women to talk about their sexual needs, preferences, to improve their sexual well-being and vitality. We've all heard the quote, "If you don't use it, you lose it." But how is this true for sex and desire and the vagina and masturbation? I want to tell you the story of a young girl who came to me at age 17 or 18. She'd only recently started exploring her sexuality. She'd been on a bus and accidentally sat to a young boy who she found very attractive and whose arm brushed her breast. She realized she was getting so turned on. And then she went on to attend some sort of basketball or football match. And she found herself getting aroused. And she was so worried. She hadn't started masturbating yet, but she was afraid of her own arousal. She asked me, "Ma'am, does being aroused mean that I'm going to become a prostitute?" And you can see the series of myths and misunderstandings and beliefs about female sexuality just in that one question. So let's look at one aspect of female sexuality, which is female masturbation. It's what women do to experience pleasure when stimulating or touching their own body or genitals. It may or may not involve stimulating the clitoris, the breasts and nipples, and it may or may not involve inserting a finger or a vibrator or a dildo inside the vagina. Why would women want to do this? Mostly it's around curiosity, but it's also about experience and practice. Over the centuries, women have practiced masturbation, either with their fingers, or with a surrogate, or with what things looked like dildos. And there's plenty written about dildos and objects that look like dildos that women have used over the centuries to experience pleasure within their bodies. So what is so important about the beliefs around masturbation? If you remember that young girl, it was so complex. It goes back to childhood and upbringing and openness about communication, about our bodies, the different ways we label different parts of our bodies, and how our primary caregivers engaged with us when we asked questions about our bodies. The ability to describe different parts of the body, how they respond, different genitals, and how they respond, the differences between male and female genitals and their purpose, questions about reproduction, about menstruation, about pleasure, orgasms, ejaculation, and what happens to desire and lust, attraction, bonding, and relationships all determine how successfully we form long-term relationships that give us pleasure, safety and security, peace of mind, and happiness. Who would have thought a journey into female sexuality would be so important for our own well-being and happiness? Even when we study masturbation, there are some keys to learning about ourselves. You could divide them into 4 different parts. One is about mindset. The second is about permission. Third is about information and assimilation. And the last one is about execution. When we look at mindset, it often goes back to our willingness to ask the questions we need to satisfy our curiosity. And several beliefs can really block us from even asking these questions. A lot of them depend on how our parents brought us up. For example, this couple I was seeing yesterday, the lady very casually reported that her parents didn't like them watching scenes in which the couple were kissing. They would quickly change the channels. Or the fact that the girl wasn't allowed to have boyfriends. She could have a friend, or she could decide to get married and bring home a son-in-law. Nothing in between was acceptable. Nobody ever talked about what it means to feel attracted, even to a film hero on a screen, what it means to actually understand the different parts of your genitalia. Very few of the women who actually come to my consulting room even know what their clitoris is, where it's located, where their urethra is, or where their vagina is. There is a lot of fear and anxiety around menstruation or not getting a period on time. I had a mother bring her daughter to me with the complaints that her periods were irregular, not coming on time, and delayed. She sent the daughter out and asked me in a very conspiratorial voice, "Is it because she's got a boyfriend? Do you think she's getting an abortion every month?" So many myths and misunderstandings. I mean, why, oh why don't mothers just educate their daughters about better contraception? Understanding what a relationship means. Understanding how to say no if they don't want that relationship. And maybe even talking about masturbation. If a girl doesn't understand her body, doesn't understand the responses she gets from her body, she won't be able to communicate them with her partner. She also won't be able to say no when she feels aroused. And she'll confuse desire and longing and love with arousal. I also see many couples with a difference in their desire levels. So there's a man who doesn't have as much desire for sex and the woman with a lot of desire for sex. Or I see a man with a lot of desire for sex and the woman with not much desire for sex. Either way, it's easier for the man to say no than it is for the woman. And it very quickly sets the context for resentment, anger, and blame developing within the relationship. Who would have known that this difference in desire levels would actually come up in a way that points to the woman not being able to explore her own sexuality, her needs, preferences, and desires before she actually got into a relationship with somebody, and being able to talk about the levels of desire and expectations for sexual intercourse or sexual intimacy that the couple desired. This point about mindset also showcases the context of the various negative beliefs there are about masturbation and the guilt or shame or blame that girls feel when they do get around to exploring themselves. They may also experience this negativity where it comes to masturbating either during pregnancy or after delivery, or maybe when their partner is absent, or maybe as they get older, as they enter menopause. Maybe they're divorced or separated or widowed. The beliefs of society and culture can impact a woman's ability to experience pleasure in her own body and as the body changes, and to be able to communicate it with the partner in concern. The second point we talked about was about permission. Once the mindset is cleared, the ability to give oneself permission to explore this process or go on this journey of self-exploration is really important. In my course on becoming orgasmic, one of the first steps we embark on as a group is learning to give ourselves permission to think sexy thoughts. And that becomes a platform on which to build an orgasmic experience. Even in couple therapy sessions, this permission giving is important. And it needs to come out in front of the partner. Many men don't like the fact that their wives might be having sexy thoughts. Not necessarily about them. And even when I ask a question about the ideal sexual scenario they'd like to imagine themselves in, many women are afraid to talk about the latest cine hero or some amazing fictional character they might have seen in a movie that would excite them sexually. They assume that the done thing or the normal thing is to talk about their current partner. The truth is, in a healthy couple relationship, where discussions about fantasies and preferences and desires are open, both couples feel free to share that they find other things just as sexy and attractive as their partners. And sometimes getting aroused and turned on and becoming orgasmic by having a fantasy may actually improve the couple relationship. But without the openness and the ability to communicate these preferences, most women don't even get there. Once a woman has permission to think sexy thoughts, she greatly improves her ability to engage in self-exploration, fantasy, and devising ways and means of exploring her body, her needs and preferences, and the way she'd like to communicate them. The next on the list is information. And today, there's no dearth of it. You're flooded with social media and psychologists and sex therapists and gynecologists and orgasmic experiences, workshops, entire conferences dedicated to information about sex and sexuality. How do you know which one applies to you? How do you filter the noise from the truth? Whatever the information out there, whatever the training out there, unless she's willing to experience it in her body, it doesn't really matter. I have so many patients who have read stuff online, consulted Dr. Google, even ordered vaginal dilators, and haven't got a clue how to use them. There are women doing pelvic floor exercises who end up converting their pelvic floor into another spasm platform because they're doing it wrong. The way to use information is to populate our vocabulary, is to get comfortable to using the terms and the language to describe different sexual experiences. In the end, a coach or a guide or a sex therapist or a gynecologist is a much more effective means of clarifying doubts than going on endless searches online. They're also more effective at helping a woman experience what she's reading in her body and overcome any of the limiting beliefs we talked about earlier. The truth is, you can get tons of information about how to masturbate, how to stimulate the clitoris, and how important it is to use the clitoris, the labia, how to experience non-genital orgasms, how to use your finger to put inside the vagina. But until somebody actually instructs you on how to experience it, you might be missing out. Sometimes you chance on the right way to do it by accident, which is fine too. But there is something called variety. And sometimes masturbating in just one way can get really boring. Exploring sexuality is a personal journey, and it's important to explore the variety in this personal journey as well, so you don't get bored. I see so many couples who've given up masturbating because they're now in a couple relationship. That's a ton of beliefs in themselves, but it also points to the fact that it leads to a very boring sex life. There's only one predictable way of getting turned on, and only one predictable way of becoming orgasmic, and one predictable way of finishing the act. That's a sure recipe for declining sexual frequency as the years pass. Every woman's and man's ability to explore their masturbatory experience, their own sexual experience, actually leads to a much better sex life. More variety, a better repertoire, a better ability to converse about what turns them on and what doesn't, and the willingness to try new things. Which brings us to the last point, which is execution. There's no dearth of books and information, but some books actually come to light, and these are the ones I use in my therapy practice. The first one is called Becoming Orgasmic, and this has been a standard reference book for many, many years. Becoming Orgasmic by Julia Hyman and J. Lo Piccolo. And the second book I'd recommend is New Male Sexuality by Bernie Zilbergeld. And just because it says male, it doesn't mean it's only to be read by men. Both of these books would be really good for both men and women to read. Implementing the exercises as advised actually encourages both the man and the woman, whether or not they're in a couple relationship, to experience their own bodies, their sexual expression, and then take it to their partners. So the next question is, in the execution, is there anything else we can do to enrich the experience? Well, what about masturbating together? What about masturbating on your own? What should the criteria be and how comfortable can you make it? Let's talk about masturbating on your own. One of the key reasons to masturbate is self-exploration and understanding. You wouldn't want to do that in a hurry. You certainly don't want to do it when learning and understanding is not your priority. The last thing you want to do is have orgasms as a reward for being anxious or depressed or upset about something. It just trains your mind that you'll get an orgasm every time you're upset, angry, or, just not doing well. It would benefit you to experience your sexuality, learning and understanding and pleasure when you're already in a relaxed and pleasurable state. So learning to relax deeply, making time to relax, making sure your privacy is ensured, nobody's going to disturb you, that you've got rid of any limiting beliefs about masturbating or exploring yourself, whatever you want to call it, making sure you've got all of your equipment around you, whether it's the vibrator, whether it's your fingers, whether it's some lubricating jelly, a mirror, making sure the cushions or the bedding is to your liking. Maybe you have some music, some fragrance, the lights. And if you're using any kind of audiovisual method to get yourself in the mood, you've got all of that set up as well. And once you're deeply relaxed, then you go about exploring your body. There are many ways to get sensuous about it. And the skin is the largest organ of the body. So engaging the skin from head to toe is a good way to start. You may or may not want to do this with dry hands or with oils or creams, various fragrances and aromatherapy. You might want to experiment with using tools. A vibrator, a small vibrator that could be used externally around the labia and the clitoris or around the nipples, or a vibrator that's used internally, inside the vagina. Experimenting with different varieties, materials, and lubricants. Using different kinds of orgasmic triggers and positions, and allowing it to become an immersive experience. Then taking the time to reflect on what you learned. And each of these steps can be done in stages. They don't all have to happen together. If you have a partner, it would be useful to take this learning back into the couple experience and then teach them. This is what worked for me and this is what didn't. This is what went better. This is how I like things done differently. This is what I've learned. And seeing if it has the same effect in a couple setting as it did when you were alone. It doesn't have to be the same. And how would it work as a couple? You can include masturbating either yourself or each other as part of the couple experience. Again, going through the preparation, understanding why you might want to do it as a couple, and having the goal of learning about each other's bodies. What turns you on, what turns you off, what you'd like more of, what you'd like less of, and how you'd like to do things differently next time. You could experiment with different games there are for couples, exploring your own body and then discussing it with each other. There's so many stories couples can tell each other about their sexual experiences, and it can become a great reminder for the next sexual experience together. Wouldn't you say then, female sexuality and exploring it can be a little bit like servicing a car? Yeah, you do learn how to drive it. You can become really competent at it. But if you never lift up the bonnet, understand what you need to do with the oil and the water, and how frequently you need to do that, you might be missing out on some really, really important maintenance. So, if you don't use it, you could lose it. It might be that the best time to learn about your sexuality is now, and the best time to learn about your sexuality could be through masturbation. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with whoever you think needs to hear it. If you'd like to talk to me one-on-one for a personal consultation, get in touch with me via my website, www.dr.neelima, Neelima, Deshpande, Deshpande.com. And you'll find a button there where you can click and book a slot with me. And I'll be sure to respond to any of your queries. Thank you. Disclaimer. This podcast is for general information purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's or listener's own risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.